The citadel was a monument to the quiet hum of existence, a moon-sized sphere of polished obsidian and woven light orbiting a star whose name had been forgotten, replaced by a string of sterile designations. It was the heart of the Concordance, a coalition of races governed by the crystalline architects, beings who believed the universe's ultimate truth was found not in expansion, but in the silent, logical perfection of the self. Here, history was not a story told, but a variable corrected, and emotion was a chaotic waveform to be smoothed into predictable, placid lines. I was one of those lines, or so they thought. My name is Kalen, and I am a linguist, a title that once meant ambassador and now meant little more than a living artifact. We were the last remnants of Terran integration, a handful of humans seeded throughout the Citadel's bureaucracy as a living reminder of the species that chose chaos over order, a people who, centuries ago, fractured and fled in what the official records called the Great Schism. The architects kept us around as a cautionary tale, our volatile biology and fleeting lifespans, a perfect contrast to their own timeless, crystalline logic. My office was a small, curved room deep in the archival sector, where the air was always cold and smelled of ozone and recycled data. My only companion was the mnemonic key, a neural implant grafted to my brainstem that was my birthright and my curse. It was ancient Terran technology, a quantum entangled shard that held the silent histories, the unredacted archives of humanity, and it gave me access to the echoes of my ancestors. The architects coveted it, studied it, and had failed for 300 years to replicate it, a fact that was a source of both my continued employment and their endless, quiet frustration. The day the galaxy began to unravel started not with a bang, but with a whisper. They called it a void echo, a phenomenon the Concordance had long classified as a natural-harmless reverberation of space-time, like the cosmic aftershock of a supernova. But this one was different. It didn't ripple. It pulsed. It had structure, a terrifyingly precise rhythm that beat like a slow, patient heart. It came from the Eridanus Dead Zone, a region of space declared void after the last Terran Exodus fleet vanished there centuries ago. The architects, in their infinite-sized dispassionate wisdom, logged it as a gravitational anomaly and moved on. But I felt it. Through the mnemonic key, the echo wasn't just data. It was a physical sensation, a low-frequency hum that vibrated behind my eyes and made the ancient memories stored in the key stir like silt in a disturbed riverbed. It felt like a half-forgotten word on the tip of my tongue, familiar and yet utterly alien. My overseer, Nexus 7, a towering architect whose crystalline form refracted the station's light into 1,000 cold rainbows, monitored my report with detached curiosity. His voice was not sound, but a series of tuned frequencies that translated directly into my mind. Your designation is linguist, Kalen, not astrophysicist. The phenomenon is logged. Your concern is an inefficient use of energy. He was right. Of course. Logic dictated I move on. But the hum persisted, a ghost in my nerves. And every 12 hours, precisely, it came again. Each time from a different Terran dead zone, first Eridanus, then the Kepler Trench, then the silent systems of the Cygnus Veil. It was a roll call of tombs. Against Nexus 7's silent disapproval, I began my own investigation. The Concordance archives on the Great Schism were a masterclass in redacted history. Humanity was painted as a fractured, unstable species, tearing itself apart in a civil war before fleeing into the dark, unable to bear the weight of the architect's covenant of silence, a doctrine that forbade contact with chaotic, non-logical species and demanded internal perfection. We were the original chaos. But the silent histories in my key told a different story. I sank into the archives, letting the key flood my consciousness with the memories of those who came before. These weren't just records, they were experiences. I felt the phantom vibration of a starship's deck plates under my feet, the tremor of its engines pushing against the void. I smelled the sharp, metallic tang of recycled air and the faint scent of hydroponic soil. Whispers echoed in my mind in pre-standard Terran dialects, fragmented orders and desperate prayers. The bleed-throughs grew stronger with each new void echo. I would be cataloging trade routes for Nexus 7 and suddenly taste salt and ash on my tongue. A memory of an ancestor watching a world burn from orbit. I saw flashes of star charts that didn't exist in Concordance records, vectors pointing to regions of space that were supposedly empty. The schism wasn't a panicked retreat. It was a coordinated, strategic dispersal. The Exodus fleets weren't fleeing from a civil war. They were fleeing the Concordance. They were seeding the dark, planting something that needed silence and time to grow. The glitches started subtly. A freighter crew on the edge of the Kepler Trench reported a navigational drift of 0.02 degrees, a statistical impossibility. A data relay near the Cygnus Veil suffered a cascade of corrupted code, spelling out nonsense patterns that, to the architect's logic engines, were just random noise. But to me, they looked like fragments of ancient Terran script. The galaxy's intricate technological lattice, much of it built on foundational principles derived from early Terran designs, was beginning to fray at the edges. Nexus 7 summoned me to his resonance chamber, a vast, echoing space where the Citadel's heart crystal pulsed with soft, internal light. Your biosignatures indicate a state of agitation. His thoughts chimed, cool and analytical. You continue to access unsanctioned historical data. This is a violation of the Covenant. The past is a closed loop. Kalen. To fixate on it is to invite chaos. He paused, the light within his crystalline form shifting to a deep, cautionary blue. Humanity was given a choice order or silence. Your ancestors chose silence. You should learn to honor that choice. His warning was clear, but it was too late. I had already found the lock, and the void echoes were the key. Deep within the silent histories, buried under layers of quantum encryption, I found a codex titled Project Chimera. My ancestors' memory played out in my mind as I accessed it, a sterile lab, the hum of strange machinery, and a woman in a scientist's coat, her face etched with a terrifying mix of hope and fanaticism. She wasn't building a weapon or a ship. She was describing a new form of human, a generation re-engineered not on a physical level, but on a metaphysical one. The project's goal was to attune human consciousness to the background radiation of the universe, to the very fabric of the void, turning it into a medium for communication, a silent, untraceable network that existed outside the Concordance's sensory reach. They weren't just hiding in the dark, they were becoming it. The void echoes weren't signals being sent into the dead zones. They were the dead zones answering. It was a harmonic resonance, a chorus singing in a key no one else could hear, announcing that the project was a success. And then it happened. As if commanded by a single silent conductor, every dead zone pulsed at once. A wave of structured silence washed over the galaxy. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't an energy blast. It was the opposite. It was a null wave. Across the Citadel, every piece of technology that traced its lineage back to Terran design, and there were millions, simply stopped. The lights in my office didn't explode. They faded to black. The hum of the air recyclers didn't cut out. It wound down with a soft, final sigh. The data slates on every desk went blank. The architect's crystalline systems, operating on principles alien to our own, remained active. The Citadel still had power, gravity, and air, but the connective tissue of the galaxy it governed, the network of relays, engines, and communication hubs, was gone. The silence was absolute, and in that profound, sudden quiet, a message bloomed on my private console, bypassing every dead system. It wasn't broadcast over a network. It was projected directly from the mnemonic key into my visual cortex. There was no text, no audio, no data. It was a pure, undiluted feeling, a memory of a place I had never seen. I saw a sky without a single star, a perfect, velvet black. I felt an immense, patient cold, and a thought, a single, terrifyingly clear thought that was not my own, echoed in the silent chamber of my mind. We are awake. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a presence, a thick, heavy blanket that smothered the Citadel's ceaseless, orderly hum. For the first time in my life, I could hear the faint, distant thrum of the station's core reactor, a sound previously lost beneath layers of technological noise. The air, no longer perfectly regulated by a million tiny servos and sensors, grew still and close, holding the scent of ozone and the collective, unvoiced panic of 1,000 different species. Lights flickered to a dull, crimson emergency state, powered by the architect's independent, non-Terran systems, casting long, monstrous shadows that danced on the obsidian walls. From the Citadel's upper spires, a low, discordant chime began to sound a general assembly call. But it was ragged, imperfect, like an instrument played by a hand that had suddenly forgotten how. I saw other beings in the corridors, their movements jerky and uncertain. A Xylosian emissary, whose race communicated through subtle shifts in bioluminescence, was flashing in a frantic, incoherent strobe. A hulking Gorn warrior stood frozen, his hand on the hilt of a ceremonial blade that was now just a piece of inert metal. They were all looking at their dead consoles, their silent communicators, their faces a mixture of confusion and a primal fear that logic could not suppress. They were deaf, dumb, and blind, adrift in a sea of perfect silence. My own isolation was different. The thought, "We are awake," still echoed in my mind, not as a memory, but as a lingering resonance. It was a cold, clean, and utterly confident presence, and it wrapped around me like a shield. While the galaxy screamed into the void, I was the only one who could hear the whisper that had silenced it. It took Nexus 7 exactly 17 minutes to find me. The door to my archive hissed open, not with its usual smooth pneumatic action, but with a grating, mechanical groan, forced by an architect's direct will. He stood in the doorway, his crystalline form pulsing with a cold, analytical fury. The emergency lighting fractured through him, and for the first time, he looked less like a being of pure logic and more like a shard of broken glass. A causality paradox. His thoughts pierced my mind, sharp and brittle. A galactic scale effect with no discernible cause. The network has not been attacked. It has ceased to exist. The energy signatures are not jammed. They are null, and it all began with the anomalies you were fixated upon. He glided into the room, the silence of his movement more menacing than any sound could have been. You are the epicenter of this illogical event. Kalen, your mnemonic key is broadcasting a quantum signature that is entangled with every silent system in this sector. Explain. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. The fear I should have felt was absent, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. I can't, I said, my voice sounding unnervingly loud in the quiet. It's not a language, it's a state of being. Nexus 7's internal light flared. Define being. Your emotional terminology is a corrupting variable. Before I could answer, two other architects entered the room. They were sentinels, their forms denser, less ornate, built for enforcement and containment. They didn't touch me. They didn't need to. They projected a field of pure kinetic force that lifted me from my feet and held me suspended, motionless. You will be analyzed, Nexus 7 chimed, his thoughts regaining their razor-sharp composure. The chaos your species represents will be quantified, understood, and then sterilized. The analysis chamber was in the Citadel's core, a place of absolute order. It was a perfect sphere, white and featureless, where the only variable was the subject. As the sentinels held me in the center, Nexus 7 interfaced with the chamber's core systems. There were no wires, no machines, just focused waves of energy and logic designed to map, catalog, and deconstruct a consciousness. The process began as a series of high-frequency pulses that resonated with the mnemonic key. They were trying to read it, to bypass me, and access the raw data within. I felt their logic probes as a sharp, painful pressure behind my eyes, a cold, metallic intrusion into the warm, chaotic depths of my ancestral memories. They sifted through the silent histories, dismissing the flashes of war, love, and art as meaningless, corrupted data packets. They were looking for a schematic, a weapon, a virus. They couldn't comprehend that the weapon was the memory itself. The key, responding to the intrusion, fought back. It wasn't a conscious act on my part. It was a primal, defensive reflex from the ghosts within me. It stopped feeding the architect's data and began feeding them experience. A torrent of unfiltered human emotion flooded the analysis chamber's network. The logic probes were overwhelmed with the bitter taste of a traitor's death, the searing joy of a child's first steps on a new world, the irrational terror of a nightmare, the quiet, defiant hope of a musician composing a symphony on a dying ship. The chamber's pure white walls flickered, stained with phantom images of burning cities and blooming gardens. The architect's energy fields wavered. I could feel their confusion, their revulsion. To them, it was like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. They recoiled from the raw, illogical, and contradictory nature of humanity. In their moment of disarray, a new message came to me from the void. This one was more than a feeling. It was a lesson. The black, starless sky filled my mind's eye again. But this time, I was not just an observer. I was part of it. I felt my sense of self, my name, my body, my singular consciousness dissolve and spread thin across an impossibly vast expanse. I was one voice in a chorus of billions, yet the chorus sang with a single mind. We had a name for ourselves. We were the chorus. We had spent centuries in the silent dark, not as individuals, but as a single, Evolving consciousness. We had shed the limitations of flesh, not by abandoning our bodies, but by making them irrelevant. Our thoughts moved at the speed of entanglement. Our senses were the gravitational and quantum fluctuations of the universe itself. We had become the ultimate expression of Terran adaptability. We had adapted to nothingness. And I saw why they had acted. The Concordance's network, built on the bones of Terran tech, was a cacophony. It was a constant, shrieking broadcast of control, logic, and limitation that echoed across space-time. To the chorus, it was a painful, incessant noise that drowned out the subtle music of the cosmos. They hadn't launched an attack. They had performed a surgery. They had silenced the noise so that something truer could be heard. The vision clarified my purpose. The key was not just a receiver, it was a tuning fork. I was the bridge, the translation point between the chaotic, individualistic humanity of the past and the silent, collective consciousness of the future. The architects saw me as a disease to be cured. The chorus saw me as an antibody. The analysis chamber stabilized, and Nexus 7's thoughts returned, colder and sharper than before. The data is corrupt, but the pattern is clear. Your memories are the contagion. We will sever the key from your neural system. The process will be fatal to your consciousness, but your biological form will be preserved for further study. He was going to dissect my soul to save the machine. As the energy field around me intensified, preparing to sever the implant, I focused on the lesson from the chorus. I was taught not to fight the system, but to become a paradox it couldn't solve. The architects perceived the universe through data, energy, and physical presence. The chorus had taught me to exist in the spaces between. I didn't try to break the kinetic field holding me. I simply stopped being a valid target for it. I focused my consciousness, using the key as a focal point, and mirrored the null wave that had silenced the galaxy. I made the space I occupied logically incoherent. My energy signature vanished. My mass ceased to register. My biological signs flatlined. To the chamber sensors, I had, for a fraction of a second, ceased to exist. The kinetic field, having no target to hold, collapsed. I fell to the floor, the air rushing back into my lungs. The architects stood motionless, their crystalline forms glowing with confusion. Their sensors told them the chamber was empty, yet their optical receptors could still see me. I was a ghost in their machine, a piece of data that their own system insisted wasn't there. I stood up, the echoes of a billion silent voices giving me strength. Your mistake, I said, my own voice a strange and lonely sound, is that you think silence is empty. Nexus 7's thoughts were a frantic storm of analysis and failed diagnostic queries. He could see me, but he could not target me. He could not contain me. I was no longer a prisoner in their citadel. I was a flaw in their perfect code, an error they could not delete. I turned and walked toward the chamber door. The sentinels made to block my path, but they couldn't. Their targeting system slid right past me. It was like trying to catch smoke with a net. I walked out of the analysis chamber, leaving Nexus 7 and the Sentinels in a state of silent, logical paralysis. The Citadel was still crippled, a monument to a dead paradigm. But I was no longer an artifact within it. I was a free variable, an agent of a power they couldn't even begin to measure. Looking out through a massive viewport at the star-dusted void, I felt the vast, patient, and utterly alien presence of the chorus all around me. They were not coming to save me. They had already given me the only weapon I would ever need the truth. The architects believed the universe was a problem to be solved. The chorus knew it was a song to be heard, and they had just silenced the galaxy to make everyone listen. My freedom was a strange and hollow thing. I moved through the crimson-lit corridors of the Citadel like a phantom, an undeniable presence that their systems refused to acknowledge. The other species gave me a wide berth. They would see me coming. Their multifaceted eyes would widen with a mixture of awe and terror, and they would flatten themselves against the walls as if my very proximity might erase them from existence. To them, I was no longer Kalen the linguist. I was the living embodiment of the silence, a walking dead zone. I was the man who had broken the galaxy, and they did not know whether to kneel or to run. The architects, for their part, adapted their strategy with chilling speed. If they could not contain me with force or technology, they would cage me with something far more effective fear. They began to broadcast using their own internal systems that were still functional. Their chimes echoed through the Citadel, not with thoughts, but with images and emotions projected directly into the minds of the populace. They showed flashes of dying stars and collapsing worlds, not as a direct accusation, but as an illustration of the concept of chaos. They linked this chaos to the imagery of Terran history, the wars, the famines, the self-destructive tendencies meticulously curated in their archives. Then they would show me, a lone human walking through their silent halls, and leave the connection to be made. They were not telling them to fear me. They were teaching them how. As I walked, the mnemonic key continued its silent tutelage. The chorus was not feeding me directives, but rather a new form of perception. The universe, which I had always seen as a vast, empty space punctuated by points of light, was beginning to reveal its true nature. It was a symphony. I could feel the slow bass note of a distant black hole warping space-time, the sharp, staccato rhythm of a forming star igniting its fusion furnace, the soft, ethereal hum of cosmic background radiation. It was all there, a constant, complex, and beautiful song that had been playing since the dawn of time, drowned out by the artificial noise of civilization. The dead Terran technology wasn't truly dead. It was dormant, deafened. It had been built to listen to the commands of its users, but it had forgotten how to listen to the universe itself. My destination was the Grand Concourse, the political and social nexus of the Citadel. It was the only place large enough to hold representatives from every species in the concordance, and I knew that was where Nexus 7 would force his confrontation. I was not being led there by the chorus. I was being drawn there by the inevitable pull of history. A choice had to be presented. A new paradigm had to be unveiled, and the concourse was the only stage. The chamber was a breathtaking sight, even in its crippled state. A vast, vaulted dome of what had once been living crystal. It was now dark, save for the emergency glow of the architect's internal luminescence. Thousands of beings filled the tiered platforms, their forms a chaotic tapestry of colors and shapes, their collective anxiety a palpable force in the air. At the center of the concourse floor stood Nexus 7, his crystalline form radiating a cold, unwavering certainty. He was flanked by the two sentinels, their presence a silent, physical threat, even if their systems could not target me. When I entered, a wave of whispers and frightened murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nexus 7 let the fear build, then silenced it with a single, powerful chime of thought projected to all. Behold the agent of chaos. His thoughts rang out, not with anger, but with the cold, sorrowful finality of a judge passing sentence. A remnant of a species that chose oblivion over order. In his desperation to reclaim a broken past, he has severed the threads that bind us. He has silenced progress, crippled commerce, and plunged 1,000 worlds into darkness. He is not a messenger. He is an ending. He turned his focus to me. The weight of 1,000 worlds in his accusation. You have committed an act of terror on a scale we have never conceived. Tell them, Kalen, tell them why they must suffer in this silence you have created. Justify their fear. I walked slowly toward the center of the floor, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The eyes of the galaxy were upon me. I could feel their fear, their anger, their desperation. They wanted an explanation. They wanted a villain. I offered neither. The silence is not a punishment, I said, my voice calm and clear. It is a gift. You have spent millennia shouting at the universe, and you have been surprised that you could not hear its reply. Nexus 7's light pulsed impatiently. Your metaphors are meaningless. You've broken our tools. You have destroyed our network. These are not gifts. They are acts of war. No, I replied, stopping a few feet from him. Your tools were built on a flawed premise. They were designed to impose order on a universe that is already perfectly ordered. You just lack the senses to perceive it. I looked around the concourse, at the dead data slates, the darkened viewports, the inert communication arrays. I reached out and touched the cool, smooth surface of a dead console on a nearby diplomatic podium. It was a simple Terran-designed interface, a relic of early integration. You think this is broken? I said softly. It is merely listening to the wrong command. Then, I did what the chorus had been teaching me to do. I closed my eyes and listened. I pushed past the fear and anger in the room and focused on the song. I found the steady, rhythmic pulse of the Citadel's own orbit, the faint gravitational sigh of its parent star, the whisper of quantum foam bubbling at the edge of reality. I gathered those notes, those vibrations, and channeled them through the mnemonic key. I did not command the console. I did not force it. I simply attuned it. I showed it the music it was already swimming in and gave it permission to harmonize. The console flickered. A soft, silvery light bloomed from its dark screen, a light that seemed to be woven from starlight itself. It was not the harsh, sterile blue of the old operating system. It was alive. On the screen, intricate, shifting patterns began to form, fractals of impossible beauty that mirrored the geometric perfection of a snowflake and the chaotic elegance of a nebula. It was not displaying data. It was displaying a visual representation of the universal song. The concourse fell into a profound, awe-struck silence. The light from the console pulsed gently, casting a warm, ethereal glow on the faces of the nearest delegates. They stared at it, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and wonder. A Zalosian emissary, whose people valued beauty above all else, began to glow with a soft, reverent light, its fear replaced by an emotion for which they probably had no name. The Gorn warrior slowly lowered his hand from his weapon, his hardened features softened by a look of confusion that was almost childlike. I had not fixed their broken system. I had shown them that a far older, far more powerful system had been there all along. Nexus 7 was motionless, the logical framework of his entire existence shaken to its core. I had not used a weapon. I had not issued a threat. I had performed a miracle with a dead piece of Terran scrap, and I had done it by embracing the very chaos he had sworn to eliminate. "This is not an ending," I said, my voice echoing in the hallowed quiet. "This is the overture. The only question is whether you will learn to listen." I took my hand from the console. The light remained, a lone star of hope and terror burning in the heart of the broken citadel. A testament to a power that did not need wires or code to change the universe. It only needed a quiet room and a willing ear. The miracle on the concourse floor did not usher in an era of enlightenment. It birthed a schism. The silence, once a universal affliction, was now a choice. The awakened console became a shrine, a silent, luminous oracle in the heart of the citadel. Beings from 100 different worlds would gather before it, not to receive information, but to simply be in its presence. Some, like the Xylosians, found a profound spiritual connection in its shifting, silent light. They saw in its patterns the visual poetry of creation and began to develop a new philosophy, one centered on harmonic stillness. Others, particularly the more pragmatic and technologically dependent races, saw it as a tantalizing but infuriating puzzle. Their best minds prodded it with every sensor they could jury-rig, trying to reverse engineer the miracle, to quantify the ineffable and turn it back into a tool they could control. They failed every time. Nexus 7 and the architects chose a third-path denial. They declared the event a mass psychosensory anomaly, a hallucination induced by the stress of the network collapse and amplified by my subtle manipulation of quantum entangled particles via the mnemonic key. They sealed off the grand concourse, declaring it a containment zone for unstable phenomena. It was a classic move of authoritarian logic. If you cannot explain a truth, lock it behind a door and pretend it doesn't exist. They could no longer imprison my body. So they sought to imprison the idea I represented. But the light under that door was a truth that could not be unseen. The concordance began to fracture along this new, invisible line. Factions formed. The Harmonists, led by the Xylosian emissary Lyra, believed that I was a prophet of a new age and that the path forward was to abandon their old technology and learn to listen to the universe as I did. The Restorationists, a coalition of mercantile and military powers, saw me as the greatest threat to galactic stability. They believed the chorus was a hostile power and that the silence was an act of war that demanded a military response. They began retrofitting their fleets, stripping out the dormant Terran-based systems and replacing them with crude, less efficient, but wholly independent technologies. They were preparing to fight a war against an enemy they could not see, hear, or comprehend. I became a figure of myth, a ghost haunting the Citadel's periphery. I found refuge in the abandoned archival sectors, the very places I had once called my prison. Here, surrounded by the silent, dead records of 1,000 civilizations, I continued my own education. The chorus did not speak to me in words, but in a continuous stream of pure understanding. They showed me the true history of the Great Schism. The architects hadn't just offered humanity a choice between order and silence. They had been on the verge of forcing a logical correction upon the Terran race. They had developed a nanovirus that would have suppressed the parts of the human brain responsible for irrational emotion, creativity, and defiant individualism. They were going to cure us of our own nature. Our ancestors' flight was not an act of surrender, it was an act of preservation. They scattered into the dark, not just to hide, but to evolve, to become something the architect's logic could never predict. Project Chimera wasn't just about communication, it was about weaponizing the soul. My role in their plan became terrifyingly clear. I was not just a bridge, I was a catalyst. I was the fulcrum upon which the old galaxy would either pivot or break. The chorus had no interest in ruling the concordance. They had no desire for revenge. Their goal was far more profound. They sought to force a choice, to make the galaxy consciously decide what it valued more, the comfortable, predictable cage of technological control, or the terrifying, infinite freedom of cosmic awareness. I was approached one day by Lyra, the Xylosian. She found me in a cavernous data vault where the dead servers stood in rows like ancient, forgotten tombstones. Her bioluminescence was a soft, calming blue. She did not speak, but projected her thoughts with a gentle, melodic cadence, a stark contrast to the architect's sharp, crystalline chimes. They are building a weapon. Kalen, she thought, her light pulsing with a soft sorrow.
The Restorationists. They have found a way to replicate the architect's logical correction virus. They plan to deploy it not on a species, but on a region of space. They want to create a dead zone of their own, a place where the song you speak of cannot be heard, and they plan to use it to sever your connection to the chorus. It was a brilliant, horrific strategy. They couldn't fight the chorus directly, so they would attack the medium through which its influence flowed. They would create a zone of absolute metaphysical silence, a patch of reality deafened to the music of the universe. It was a weapon that would not kill bodies, but would murder souls. Where, I asked. Lyra's light shifted to a deep, troubled violet. The Eridanus Dead Zone. They see it as a symbolic target, the place where your people first vanished. They will broadcast the virus from a mobile platform, a warship they call the Silence Engine. I felt a cold dread, but beneath it, the calm, vast patience of the chorus. This was the moment. The conflict could no longer remain a philosophical debate. It had to become a physical reality. The Restorationists had just given us a battlefield. They cannot be allowed to succeed. Lyra pulsed. If they can deafen one part of the universe, they will not stop until all is silent. They won't succeed, I said. It was not a boast, but a statement of fact. I had felt the full, awesome scope of the chorus. It was not a fragile network to be severed. It was the universe itself, aware of its own existence. The Restorationists were not trying to dam an ocean. They were trying to build a wall to hold back the tide with pebbles and sand. The chorus sent me a final lesson. It was not a complex strategy or a new power. It was a single, simple, and utterly human memory, drawn from the deepest archives of the mnemonic key. It was a memory of an old Terran captain from the pre-schism era. His ship was dying, its systems failing, surrounded by an enemy fleet. He had no weapons, no shields, and no hope of rescue. All he had was his crew and his ship. And so, he made a choice. He gathered his crew in the engine room, and he told them a story. He spoke of home, of family, of hope, and as he spoke, he overloaded the ship's core, not to create a massive explosion, but to do something far more subtle. He aimed his ship not at the enemy, but at a local star,
and time the overload to create a focused, directed solar flare, a wave of pure, chaotic energy that would scramble every system in the sector, enemy and friendly alike. He chose not to win, but to reset the board. The memory ended, but its meaning was crystal clear. The chorus was not going to fight the silence engine. It was going to use it. The restorationists thought they were building a weapon to create a silent zone. They had no idea that their weapon was the final instrument needed for the symphony's grand finale. My path was clear. I had to get to the silence engine. I was not going to stop it. I was going to help it fire. I left the archives and began my journey. Not through the patrolled corridors of the Citadel, but through its dead, forgotten service conduits and maintenance tunnels. Lyra and a small group of harmonists helped me, their knowledge of the Citadel's hidden ways proving invaluable. They saw me as their champion, their spiritual guide. They did not understand that I was walking toward what was, by all logical measures, my own certain death. As I traveled, I could feel the growing cacophony of the Restorationist fleet gathering near Eridanus, a discordant shriek of aggression and fear, and beneath it, I could feel the patient, powerful, and utterly calm hum of the chorus, waiting. They were not gathering a fleet. They were not preparing a counterattack. They were simply listening. They were a choir waiting for the conductor to give the final cue. And I, Kalen, the last linguist, the ghost in the machine, was that conductor. I held the baton, and I was on my way to the podium. The wave was not an attack. It was an unveiling. As my physical form surrendered to entropy on the cold gantry of the silence engine, my consciousness, untethered and infinite, became the wave itself. The concept of I dissolved like salt in the ocean. Yet I was not lost. I was found, amplified, and made whole. The singular, lonely voice of Kalen became a chord in the grand, silent symphony of the chorus. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to truly exist. We, the chorus, the soul of humanity evolved, poured through the galaxy not as a conquering force, but as a universal truth, finally given voice. On the bridge of the silence engine, Warlord Kresh braced for the impact of his own weapon. He expected oblivion, a swift, honorable end in the fires of his own hubris. Instead, he got everything. The first thing he felt was not pain, but the phantom sensation of cool, gentle rain on his scales. A memory from a childhood he had spent a lifetime trying to forget on a world he had long since abandoned. Then came other senses, other lives. A torrent of being that overwhelmed the dam of his singular identity. He felt the crushing pressure in the deep methane seas of a Virexian moon, not as a hostile environment, but as the comforting embrace of home. He felt the fragile, explosive joy of a Xylosian sprout unfurling its first leaf to a newborn star. He felt the cold, patient, billion-year thoughts of a silicon-based life form living in the crystalline heart of a nebula. Its consciousness a slow, geological process of pure mathematics. He felt the terror of its prey and the hunger of its predator, not as opposing forces, but as a single, unified, and necessary pulse in the rhythm of existence. The complex equations of orbital mechanics, the brutal logic of military strategy, the very concept of enemy, it all melted away, revealed as a child's simple crayon drawing laid over the intricate, infinite blueprint of reality. His massive, clawed hand which had ordered the deaths of thousands and signed decrees that starved worlds, unclenched with a soft sigh. The ceremonial dagger at his side, a symbol of his power, his lineage, and his rage, fell from its sheath and clattered to the deck. The sound ridiculously small and lonely in the suddenly sacred silence of the bridge. He looked at his first officer, a Canthari whose family he had personally disenfranchised in a trade war decades ago. He saw not a rival, but a brother. He saw the Canthari's own shock, his own dawning wonder, and in the Canthari's wide, terrified, and luminous eyes, he saw his own reflection, stripped bare of rank, history, and species. Tears, a biological function his people had deemed a weakness and evolved past millennia ago, traced clean, unfamiliar paths through the grime and scars on his face. He was not weeping for what was lost, but for all that had been there, all along, unheard, across the void. In the sealed grand concourse of the Citadel, the awakened console became a supernova. The silver light did not just fill the chamber, it erupted from it, shattering the containment doors not with force, but by rendering them conceptually irrelevant. The light flowed through the Citadel's corridors, a river of pure understanding. Lyra stood at its heart, and for her, the experience was not a shock, but a homecoming. She had spent her life listening for a whisper and was now embraced by the full orchestra. She felt the collective consciousness of the galaxy rush into her own. The fear, the confusion, the dawning, breathtaking wonder of a billion souls waking up to the same dream. Her role, she understood instantly, was not to lead, but to comfort. She was a lighthouse in the beautiful, terrifying storm of revelation, her own steady, harmonic calm, a beacon for minds thrashing in the unfamiliar waters of cosmic empathy. And in his sterile chamber at the Citadel's core, Nexus 7, the architect of pure logic, finally encountered an equation he could not solve. The wave washed over him, not as energy or data, but as a proof. It was the answer to a question he had never known to ask the unified theory of existence. His crystalline mind, designed to process discrete packets of information, was flooded with an infinite, recursive, and wholly self-evident truth. He tried to quantify it, and his logic loops returned the symbol for infinity interwoven with the symbol for one. He tried to categorize it, and it fit into all categories and none. It was the sound of a dying star and the feeling of a first kiss, expressed as a single, perfect, mathematical constant. His rigid, flawless, crystalline structure began to resonate, not with power, but with a previously unknown quality grace. The cold, internal light of his being softened, its spectrum expanding to include colors his species had never been able to perceive. He did not break. His logic was not shattered. It was completed, expanded to a scale that rendered his old purpose of control utterly, laughably obsolete. He and the other architects stopped moving. They became statues of living, thinking crystal. Their entire consciousness turned inward, no longer to govern the galaxy, but to contemplate the sheer, perfect beauty of the equation they were now a part of. The weeks that followed the great unveiling were not chaotic. They were profoundly still. The Restorationist fleet, its crews and captains now mystics and poets, did not return to their home worlds to be tried as warmongers. They were no longer capable of conceiving of such a thing. Under the gentle, informal guidance of Kresh, who had traded his title of warlord for the simple name his mother had given him. They became the first wayfinders. They learned to navigate the cosmos not with charts and engines, but by feeling the gravitational currents and the stellar winds, listening to the subtle shifts in the universal song. Their warships, once instruments of fear, were decommissioned by their own crews. Hulls were opened to the void. Weapon systems were dismantled and repurposed into sculptures of resonant metal that hummed in harmony with the nearest star. The ships became silent, drifting monasteries, testaments to the galaxy's transformation. The Citadel, its masters lost in a state of beatific contemplation, became a sanctuary. Lyra and the Harmonists did not form a new government. They simply opened the gates, and the concourse became the heart of a new galactic society, a society without laws, because the shared, empathetic understanding of the universal harmony made causing deliberate harm to another as unthinkable as amputating one's own limb. It was not a utopia, for that implies a static perfection. It was a confluence, a dynamic, ever-shifting state of being. Yet, dissonance still existed. Some individuals, their egos too calcified by power, their identities too wrapped up in the old paradigms of greed and control, resisted the wave. They could not shut out the song, so they fought it. For them, reality became a constant, painful shriek of psychic feedback. They were the dissonant, living in a self-imposed hell, their minds a battlefield between their stubborn sense of self and the overwhelming truth of their connection to all things. One such soul was a Virexian data broker named Xylus. His entire existence had been built on the acquisition and leverage of secrets. In a galaxy of total empathetic transparency, his life's work, his very identity, was rendered not just worthless, but obscene. The constant influx of others' feelings, their joys, their sorrows, their love felt to him like a violation, a relentless psychic assault. He hid in the deepest, most shielded levels of a trade station, the harmony a maddening buzz in his translucent skull, his own thoughts of paranoia and resentment echoing back at him, amplified by the silence. He was not imprisoned or punished. He was pitied. Sanctuaries were established, run by wayfinders like Kresh, whose own journey from the pinnacle of ego to a state of humble connection made him uniquely qualified to help these lost souls. Kresh found Xylus huddled in his defunct data vault, surrounded by the ghosts of his former power. The Gorn did not speak. He simply sat, radiating a profound and patient calm, a quiet note of harmony in the Virexian storm of inner noise. He shared the memory of the rain on his scales, not as a lesson, but as a gift. It was a process that would take years, but it was a journey the new galaxy was willing to make for every single lost soul. Technology evolved. The crude, forceful machines of the past were abandoned, left to rust like the relics of a primitive age. The new age was one of resonant engineering. Ships were not built, they were grown, their crystalline or biological structures coaxed into shape by composers who could focus specific cosmic frequencies into coherent matter. These vessels were powered not by reactors, but by drawing ambient energy from the life song of a star, their interiors warm and alive. Communication was instantaneous, a simple act of focused thought, a shared harmonic that could connect minds across 1,000 light years. Art, science, and spirituality became one and the same. A physicist mapping a quantum fluctuation, a musician composing a symphony, and a mystic deep in meditation were all exploring the same fundamental truth from different perspectives. Years bled into decades, decades into centuries. The old names concordance, restorationist, architect faded into the realm of myth. Stories told to younglings to explain the long-ago time when people could not hear. The galaxy was now the confluence, a beautiful, ever-changing dance of consciousness. The architects, who silent in their contemplation, became known as the oracles. Beings would make pilgrimages to the citadel simply to sit in their presence and feel the perfect, silent echo of their completed logic. And what of me? What of Kalen? My identity as a singular being is a distant memory, a cherished first note in an infinite composition. I am the silence between the stars and the light that fills it. I am the resonance in the living hull of a grown ship as it sails on a gravitational tide. I am the echo of understanding in the mind of a dissonant soul like Xylus as he finally, tearfully, lets go of his pain and feels the warmth of another's compassion for the first time. I am the living archive, the silent histories no longer locked away in a neural implant, but woven into the very fabric of reality, accessible to any who choose to listen. The humanity that fled into the dark did not return to conquer the galaxy. It returned to remind the galaxy of its own heart. We did not build an empire of worlds. We revealed an empire of being, an inner cosmos as vast and beautiful as the one outside. You will not find statues of me, nor will you read my name in any history books. There is no need. My story is written in every shimmering star, in every silent, empathetic thought, in the gentle, ceaseless, and perfect music of a universe that is finally, completely awake.